Under the spotlight, they looked perfect, icons of love, fame, and success. But when the curtain fell, only secrets remained. Behind the glamour were forbidden loves, broken vows, and hearts brave enough to live their truth, no matter the cost. Stay until the end, because the truth behind the spotlight will change the way you see them forever. For years, Pablo Perroni looked like the perfect man, talented, loving, grounded. On stage, he was an artist. At home, a husband and a father. And beside him stood Mariana Garza, actress, singer, and one of the most beloved figures in Mexican entertainment. Together, they seemed untouchable. They shared everything: a daughter, a home, and even a dream. They ran the Milan Theater, a space filled with laughter, music, and creativity. They weren't just a couple, they were a partnership. Two artists building something beautiful in a business that rarely lets love survive. To the public, they were proof that fame didn't have to destroy intimacy. The perfect duo, grounded, real, admired, a family you could believe in. But forever, it turned out, had its own definition. One afternoon, without warning, the announcement came. They were separating. No shouting, no scandal, no tabloid exclusives, just a calm, carefully written statement, a mutual decision, a mature choice made with love. It sounded peaceful, too peaceful. Because, in the world of show business, silence only feeds curiosity. And soon, the whispers began. But what many forgot was that Pablo Perroni had never hidden behind masks. From the very beginning, he had spoken openly about being bisexual. He didn't reveal it for headlines, he simply said it because it was true. And Mariana knew it. She accepted it. She loved him for who he was, not for what the world expected him to be. For years, they lived in that honesty, a love that wasn't about ownership, but understanding. They built a life on truth, until one day, truth asked for more. A man entered Pablo's life, quietly, unexpectedly. Someone who saw him not as an actor, not as a husband, but as a person still learning how to be whole. That connection changed everything. It wasn't betrayal, it was awakening. It wasn't scandal, it was clarity. The tabloids, of course, told it differently. They always do. But those close to them saw what few people ever do. Two people choosing peace over performance, vast dignity over drama. There were no screaming interviews, no divided camps, no custody battles. Only two voices, steady and calm, saying, "Love doesn't always mean staying together." Pablo once said, "To love someone doesn't mean to own them. And to stop being a couple doesn't mean to stop being family." And he lived by those words. While the world speculated, he and Mariana kept working together. They co-parented their daughter, produced plays side by side, and even appeared on the same stage again, smiling, relaxed, united in a new kind of love. In an industry built on image, their truth felt revolutionary. Because they didn't hide behind statements or silence. They stood in the light. For a man who had spent years living between two worlds, between expectation and authenticity, this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of freedom. And freedom, Pablo discovered, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the peace that comes when you stop pretending, when you stop apologizing for who you are. Because while others cling to appearances, Pablo Perroni stood on stage and said, "This is me." Not for attention, for truth. And in a culture still learning that love has many shapes, his courage resonated far beyond the gossip pages. The story of Pablo and Mariana isn't about betrayal, it's about transformation. About two people brave enough to end a chapter without turning it into a war. They chose honesty over illusion, respect over resentment, and that choice made them timeless. And maybe that's why their story still lingers, because for once a love that ended didn't have to break. It simply evolved. Enrique Peña Nieto, the man who rose to Mexico's presidency with a flawless smile and the image of a perfect politician. Every gesture rehearsed, every word measured. always surrounded by cameras, always beside a first lady who seemed pulled straight out of a telenovela script. He was the face of modern Mexico, young, handsome, eloquent, the man who promised change and delivered charisma. But behind that immaculate image, dark whispers were spreading, rumors that never stopped chasing him. His first wife, Monica Pretolini, was the woman who stood by him from the very beginning, his quiet confidant and the architect of his carefully polished life. Together, they projected the image of the ideal family, 3 children, public devotion, and the illusion of harmony that every voter wanted to believe in. But those who truly knew them told a different story. According to people close to the family, Monica once walked in on something that changed everything. A moment she was never supposed to see. Peña Nieto with another man. What followed was chaos behind closed doors, arguments, silence, fear, and then, not long after that confrontation, Monica died suddenly. Her death was ruled natural, but the whispers said otherwise. There were too many questions, too many details that didn't quite fit. For some, it was a tragedy. For others, a secret buried along with her. Years later, Peña Nieto returned to the spotlight, not as a widower, but as a groom once again. This time, his bride was Angélica Rivera, the glamorous actress millions knew as La Gaviota. Their wedding was televised, a national spectacle dressed as a fairy tale. The politician and the star, a perfect match for headlines, a perfect distraction for the people. But Mexico wasn't buying it. Behind every televised kiss was a question no one dared to ask too loudly. Was this love, or was it a deal? Rumors claimed the marriage was contractual, an arrangement carefully negotiated to humanize the president and soften his image. Inside Los Pinos, the presidential residence, sources said they led separate lives, different bedrooms, different routines, united only by the cameras that demanded their smiles. And then another name entered the conversation, Eduardo Verástegui, the actor and devout public figure who shared more than a few quiet connections with the president. He traveled on the presidential plane, stood near him on official visits, and appeared in photos that fueled the fire even more. Officially, he was Angélica Rivera's guest. Unofficially, many believed the invitation came from elsewhere. The story grew darker. Some whispered that Verástegui was the real reason behind the First Lady's quiet frustration, the unseen presence in a marriage that was never meant to last. If it was all a facade, it lasted exactly as long as his presidency. When Peña Nieto's 6-year term ended, the fairy tale ended too. Angélica Rivera announced their divorce, and the couple who had once embodied Mexico's perfect image disappeared from the front pages overnight. Today, Enrique Peña Nieto's legacy isn't measured only by policies or scandals, but by the questions that refuse to die. Rumors of forbidden loves, marriages of convenience, and a private life wrapped in shadows. Because sometimes the story of a president isn't written in speeches or reforms, but in the silences, the glances, and the secrets he carries to the end. She was known as La Novia de Mexico, the nation's sweetheart. The girl next door with a golden voice, the smile that made a country believe in innocence. Angélica María wasn't just a singer or an actress. She was a dream dressed in white, the image of purity in a world built on appearances. Men adored her, mothers trusted her, and every young girl wanted to be her. But fame, like love, has 2 faces. And in the shadows of her perfect image stood another star, Jacqueline. Bold, magnetic, fierce. Where Angélica was sweetness, Jacqueline was fire. Together, they lit up every room they entered, 2 women who couldn't be ignored. And between them, a whisper began. It started quietly. On film sets, in dressing rooms, in the corridors where secrets always travel faster than truth. People said Angélica and Jacqueline shared something that didn't fit the mold of friendship. Something too tender, too careful, too real. But it was the 1970s, and in Mexico, love had rules. Rules that told women what they could be, who they could love, and how they should appear before the world. So whatever existed between them, if it existed, had to live in the silence between scenes, in glances too long to be casual, in songs that sounded like confessions. In public, they played their parts perfectly, graceful, polite, unshakable. They were wives, mothers, professionals, symbols of stability in a culture that worshipped perfection. But behind the cameras, those who worked close to them spoke of a connection too intense to ignore. A look across a crowded set, a hand held too long, a comfort that only comes from knowing and being known. The press never dared to publish the rumor outright. Mexico wasn't ready for that. But the audience didn't need headlines. They could read between the lines. And the more the women stayed silent, the louder the fascination grew. Then came the turning point. Jacqueline was invited to be crowned at an LGBT pride event, a tribute from a community that had long whispered her name. She refused. Some said caution, others denial, but it only deepened the legend. Were they hiding something or just protecting their peace? No one knew. Because sometimes what keeps a story alive isn't what's revealed, but what isn't. Decades later, fans still debate it. Old interviews are rewatched, photos are re-examined like clues from a mystery. Every touch, every smile, every song lyric feels like evidence of something deeper. But maybe it's not about proof at all. Maybe it's about what they represented. Two women who defied expectations, who carried their own kind of quiet rebellion just by being themselves in a world that wanted to define them. Neither Angélica nor Jacqueline ever confirmed a thing. They didn't have to. Their silence became its own statement, a kind of quiet dignity that said, what's ours doesn't need to be explained. And perhaps that's why the story still lingers. Because maybe they were just friends. Or maybe they were something more. Two hearts that found connection in a time when love between women wasn't allowed to exist in daylight. To this day, no one truly knows. But one truth endures. In the world of fame, silence often speaks louder than confession. And sometimes the most unforgettable love stories are the ones that never dared to be told. Behind the flawless smile and the angelic voice of Rocío Dúrcal lay a rumor that still shakes Spanish music fans decades later. She was the Spanish queen who conquered Latin America, a voice that turned heartbreak into beauty, and a woman who seemed to have everything: fame, family, and love. Her husband, Antonio Morales, was the charming singer who stood beside her through it all. Together, they seemed untouchable, the model of devotion and success. And then, there was Juan Gabriel, El Divo de Juárez, the genius who wrote songs for her soul, the man who could make the world weep with a single lyric. It all began in 1977. Rocío and Juan Gabriel joined forces for what would become a historic album, Canta a Juan Gabriel. The collaboration was electric. Her voice met his words, and magic happened. What was supposed to be one album became six masterpieces that defined an era, songs that filled stadiums, won awards, and created a friendship that looked unbreakable. They were the perfect duo, the diva and the poet, bound by art and something unspoken. Fans adored them. The industry envied them, and Rocío trusted him completely. But then, something changed. A quiet distance, a silence that grew. And without warning, it was over. No fight, no explanation, just silence. And that's when the rumors began. According to Joaquín Munoz, Juan Gabriel's former manager, the truth was more shocking than anyone imagined. He claimed Juan Gabriel, the man behind Latin music's greatest love songs, had fallen not for Rocío but for her husband, Antonio Morales. In his memoir, Munoz described a secret affair, a forbidden triangle of art, love, and desire too dangerous to ever be named. From that moment, fans began to re-listen to the songs, every lyric, every word. When Rocío sang Porque te amé, I loved you, though you belonged to someone else, the world started to wonder. Was she telling her own story without meaning to? Was the music her confession? It was a theory too wild to ignore. The more people searched, the more they thought they found clues. In her eyes on stage, in the melancholy tone of her later albums, in the way she avoided questions about Juan Gabriel for the rest of her life. And yet, Rocío never confirmed a thing. She never denied it either. She simply sang. Her voice, delicate, aching, carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. After her death, the rumor refused to fade. Each new generation searched her lyrics for answers she never gave. Was she the betrayed wife, the silent accomplice, or just a woman caught between two men and a love unspoken? No one knows. And maybe that's the point. Because Rocío Dúrcal was more than a singer. She carried the emotions the rest of us can't name. Love that hurts. Love that lies. Love that endures in silence. In the end, Rocío's truth was written not in words but in melody. In every trembling note, every sigh between verses, she left behind pieces of the story she could never tell. Her voice still echoes, soft, haunting, eternal, because some secrets, like her songs, were never meant to fade. In the 1990s, Manuel Mijares wasn't just a singer. He was the voice of Mexico. Elegant, composed, adored by millions, he carried himself like a man born for the stage. Every note, every bow, every smile, perfectly timed, effortlessly graceful. He represented an era of romance and respect. A gentleman in a world that worshipped idols. Women swooned, men admired him, and mothers saw in him the image of decency itself. He wasn't simply performing songs, he was defining what love sounded like for an entire generation. When he married Lucero, Mexico's beloved bride of America, it felt like the perfect ending to a perfect song. Two icons, one nation watching. Their 1997 wedding was a spectacle, broadcast live like a royal event. For one afternoon, Mexico believed in love again. But fairy tales made for television rarely survive once the lights go out. Behind the curtain, whispers began to spread, soft at first, then louder. Some said their marriage had never been about love, but about image. That Televisa, the entertainment giant that made them both, had written the script, turning them into the perfect marketing dream. Two stars tied together not by passion, but by paperwork. To the public, Mijares was the model husband, steady, loyal, deeply romantic. But those close to him saw something else. A man who gave the world love songs, while quietly wrestling with his own truth. As time passed, new stories emerged. Rumors that Lucero had drifted away, drawn to someone powerful, someone whose wealth and influence could eclipse even fame. And at the same time, the tabloids began to turn their gaze toward Mijares himself, linking him to a figure in politics, a man described as close, discreet, and always present. It was the kind of gossip that could destroy a reputation in a single headline. But Mijares never flinched. He never raised his voice. He kept singing, as if the songs could carry what words never should. For more than a decade, the illusion held. 2 children, magazine covers, smiling interviews that painted a perfect home. And then one day, the statement came. Short, calm, final. The marriage was over. But the story didn't end there. Unlike most celebrity breakups, this one had no bitterness, no blame. Instead, there was something unexpected, mutual respect. Soon they were seen together again, not as lovers but as artists, sharing microphones, trading verses, laughing on stage. Audiences were stunned. Their chemistry was still alive, a spark no divorce could extinguish. Was it nostalgia? Was it love reborn in another form? No one could tell. But when they sang together, something unspoken still connected them. Something that didn't need labels. Years later, when fans ask Mijares about Lucero, he smiles softly. Never bitterness, never denial, only a quiet affection. the kind that comes from surviving a storm without losing your grace. And maybe that's what defines him most. Not the rumors, not the marriage, not even the mystery of what truly happened behind closed doors, but the way he carried himself, with dignity, calm, and a certain sadness that only true gentlemen wear well. Because in an industry built on illusion, where love is often scripted and loyalty is rare, Manuel Mijares remained what he always was, a man who sang about love, even when the lyrics were heavier than his heart. In the world of Mexican television, Jorge Antolín was the image of elegance. Handsome, confident, successful. A man who had everything, fame, admirers, and a future built on perfection. But in the 1990s, perfection came with a price. And for Jorge, that price was truth. When he married 23-year-old actress Cynthia Clitbo, she was full of dreams and faith that love could fix anything. Their wedding looked perfect. A rising star and a leading man. A match that made sense to everyone but them. According to Cynthia, it wasn't love. It was pressure. Pressure to silence rumors, protect an image, and play a role that was never real. On their wedding night, the truth finally surfaced. The kind of truth that doesn't whisper, it shatters. Jorge confessed that their marriage wasn't what it seemed. That it was a screen, a disguise, a way to hide the part of himself the world wouldn't accept. For Cynthia, it was devastating, not only because she felt deceived, but because she became part of a lie she didn't choose. She was young, in love, and suddenly trapped in someone else's secret. The marriage collapsed almost immediately. Cynthia fell into a deep depression, seeking therapy just to make sense of what had happened. Years later, she would describe those nights as dark tunnels with no exit. And yet, from that darkness, she rose, turning pain into strength, silence into voice. She began speaking openly about mental health, about the dangers of shame, and about the machismo that had forced so many men, like Jorge, to marry women just to survive public judgment. For Jorge, the years that followed were quieter. He distanced himself from the scandal, claiming parts of the story were exaggerated. But the shadow of that confession never completely disappeared. Because deep down, the truth remained the same. Jorge Antolín lived in a time when being honest about who you were could destroy everything you had built. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. A man trapped between who he was and who he was allowed to be. Behind the cameras, behind the scripts and the interviews, was a human being terrified of rejection. Someone who thought a lie could protect him from loneliness, only to discover it created a different kind of isolation. And yet, there's something deeply human in that mistake. A reminder that fear can make even the strongest people hide. That love built on illusion will always collapse under its own weight. Cynthia's pain became her strength. Jorge's silence became his prison. And together, their story became a mirror, reflecting an era where truth was dangerous and where appearances were everything. Today, when people mention Jorge Antolín, they remember the actor, the charm, the elegance. But behind that smile lies a story of a man who spent years acting, not just on stage but in his own life. Because sometimes the hardest role to play is the one the world forces on you. And the hardest truth to tell is the one you spend your life hiding. In the golden age of Mexican cinema, Arturo de Córdoba had it all. Fame, charm, and that magnetic presence that made women across the country sigh just by seeing his smile. He was the perfect man, strong, elegant, untouchable. But behind that flawless facade, there was a rumor that dared to whisper only in the shadows, a name that kept appearing next to his. Another actor, equally admired, Ramon Gay. Were they best friends? Or was there something deeper, something forbidden in the world they lived in? The question hung in the air, unspoken but impossible to silence. They worked in the same studios, shared circles, long nights, quiet talks after filming. On camera, they were strong. Off camera, there was tenderness, a bond that spoke without words. In a world that worshipped masculinity, two men couldn't be seen as vulnerable. So they showed friendship and hid a connection the world would never forgive. Then tragedy struck. Ramon Gay was murdered, shot by the husband of actress Evangelina Elizondo. The news spread like wildfire, turning gossip into grief overnight. At the funeral, truth seemed to tremble in plain sight. Arturo stood by the coffin, shoulders shaking, eyes full of grief, not like an acquaintance, but a man who'd lost a part of himself. Reporters noticed. Whispers spread faster than ink could dry. Was this the mourning of a friend, or the heartbreak of a lover forced to stay silent in a world that wouldn't forgive him? Those close to Arturo later said their bond was more than friendship, that theirs was a love hidden behind the curtain, a secret sealed by the morality of their time. After Ramon's death, something in Arturo broke, quietly, completely. He kept acting, of course. He played the leading man again and again, his voice deep, his stare commanding. But those who knew him said it wasn't the same. The sparkle, the mischief, the warmth, it had vanished. He began drinking more. He stopped attending the industry parties he once loved. Directors whispered that Arturo no longer smiled between takes, that he'd sit in silence, lost in thought, as if haunted by a presence just out of reach. Some say he carried Ramon's memory everywhere, in an old photograph, folded and hidden in a wallet, or in the way he lingered alone on set after everyone else had gone home. For the public, Arturo remained the symbol of masculine perfection. But in private, he was a man living with ghosts, a prisoner of the same image that had once made him a legend. In the end, his greatest role wasn't on screen. It was pretending he'd moved on. Because in a time when love had to hide, Arturo de Córdoba and Ramon Gay loved the only way they could, in silence. Some say the day Ramon died, so did Arturo. Others believe their story still lingers, flickering through old black and white films, a secret love forever trapped in light. Niurka Marcos, the name alone means chaos and charisma. A woman of fire, of glitter, of scandal. In a world built on masks, she refused to wear one. She said what she felt, did what she wanted, and never apologized for either. Her life was a performance, but she was never acting. Her love life was no exception. When she married actor Bobby Larios, the cameras turned their romance into a national event. Their wedding was all lights, headlines, and champagne, a media circus disguised as a fairy tale. The Cuban bombshell and the handsome Mexican actor, it looked like passion, perfection, and promise. They smiled for the cameras, kissed for the crowd, and sold the idea of love that Mexico wanted to believe in. But reality is never as glossy as a magazine cover. Behind closed doors, things began to unravel. The rumors came first. Quiet, persistent, poisonous. Was it love or a production? A marriage for fame, not for feeling? Some whispered that Bobby's heart didn't quite belong where he said it did, that his desires leaned elsewhere, toward the very kind of secret Niurka had built her career exposing. Then the real explosion hit. A magazine headline screamed betrayal. Claims that Bobby was seeing someone else while married to the most explosive woman in showbiz. His mother defended him publicly, calling the gossip cruel and false. But it didn't matter. Once the spark was lit, Niurka turned the fire into fuel. When the marriage crumbled, it wasn't quiet. It wasn't dignified. It was pure Niurka, loud, unfiltered, devastating. She didn't hold back. She never does. Every interview was a battlefield, every word a bullet. She didn't whisper her pain, she broadcast it. But here's the truth about Niurka Marcos. She doesn't hide to heal. She performs her pain until it loses power. She turns heartbreak into headlines, betrayal into ammunition, and silence into her stage. "If you hurt me," she once said, "you'd better pray I never opened my mouth." And she wasn't bluffing. To most, it looked like scandal. To her, it was survival. She wasn't interested in revenge, not exactly. What she wanted was truth, raw and unfiltered, even if it burned everyone around her. Because in Niurka's world, truth isn't gentle. It's fire. After the breakup, Bobby faded from the spotlight. Niurka didn't. She rose higher, stronger, louder, reclaiming her own narrative. She laughed about it, danced through it, and reminded everyone watching that she didn't need a man to define her worth. Behind the chaos, there's something almost tragic. A woman punished for being too real in a world that rewards pretending. But Niurka never played nice. She played honest. And that's why, love her or hate her, you can't ignore her. Because for Niurka Marcos, love isn't a quiet promise, it's a war cry. And scandal? That's just the soundtrack. In a world where everyone's afraid of being exposed, Niurka turned exposure into empowerment. She made controversy her crown and her survival, her legacy. No one walks away from her story unshaken, because when Niurka loves, she burns, and when she's betrayed, she burns brighter. On stage, Lupita D'Alessio was untouchable, fierce, fiery. A storm in heels and sequins. They called her La Leona Dormida, the sleeping lioness. But there was nothing asleep about her. Her voice could break hearts and silence critics. She was passion made flesh, a woman who had survived fame, heartbreak, and her own demons. She didn't just sing about pain, she devoured it and turned it into something powerful. But even lions can bleed. Her story with Christian Rosell began like every love song she'd ever sung, with hope and fire. He was charming, elegant, the picture of confidence, the kind of man who knew how to make an entrance and how to make a woman feel chosen. After years of heartbreak and betrayal, Lupita thought she had finally found peace. He seemed perfect, too perfect. Their wedding was beautiful, a symbol of rebirth. A promise that love could still win after everything. But the truth, like all truths, came crawling in the dark. Whispers began to follow Christian's name, quiet at first, then louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. They said he wasn't being honest, that behind the charm was a secret too dangerous for the tabloids to print. Some called him an opportunist, a man drawn not by love, but by Lupita's fame and fortune. Others went further, claiming his heart belonged not to women at all. And soon, the fairy tale began to crumble. What should have been their first night as husband and wife became the beginning of an emotional winter. According to those close to her, the marriage never truly began. No warmth, no intimacy, no connection. Just coldness, a distance that felt rehearsed, calculated. It was as if Christian had married the legend, not the woman. And Lupita, for the first time in her life, felt invisible. She tried to hold on, because that's what strong women do. They fight for love, even when love has already left the room. But the lies began to show. The smiles looked rehearsed, the affection turned mechanical, and the lioness, once lulled to sleep by hope, began to wake, angry, heartbroken, unstoppable. When she finally discovered the truth, whatever that truth really was, something inside her snapped. The roar that had been silenced by affection returned with vengeance, and when she walked away, it wasn't in defeat. It was in triumph. She left him, not quietly, but powerfully. No tears for the cameras, no apologies, just the raw, unflinching honesty that had always defined her. And she spoke, not to destroy him, but to remind the world that even the strongest women can fall for a beautiful lie. And even then, they rise. Because Lupita D'Alessio wasn't just a singer. She was a survivor. A woman who had seen how love could lift you up, and how it could bury you alive. But instead of drowning, she sang louder. Her pain became her melody. Her heartbreak became her roar. And from that moment on, every time she stood before a microphone, the audience could feel the truth trembling behind every word. Years later, she looked back with the calm of someone who had lived through the fire and learned to dance in it. "I've been deceived, I've been broken," she said once, "but I've never stayed down." That's the thing about lions. They don't fear the fire. They are the fire. And that's what Lupita D'Alessio became. Not the woman who was betrayed, but the woman who survived it. She taught an entire generation that power isn't born from perfection. It's born from pain that refuses to stay silent. In the end, her story wasn't a tragedy. It was a resurrection. Because the lioness didn't just roar, she roared back. Fame, love, betrayal. We've seen how even the brightest stars can hide the darkest secrets. But one last story remains, the one they never wanted you to hear. Don't miss the final chapter. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which story hit you hardest, because the truth behind the spotlight isn't done yet.